How are you there? How are you there? Let's look at some fun facts. The Chinese GDP is around 18 trillion US dollars, and the American GDP is around 25 trillion US dollars. The use of the US dollar in global trade is over 90% or around 90%, and the use of the Chinese yuan is still under 2%, but in the past 6 or 8 years, the Chinese banking system has been expanding the use of the yuan with China's trading partners, meaning that the US dollar hegemony is still intact for the foreseeable future, but China is still edging in because China is becoming, not becoming, actually is already the superpower when it comes to global manufacturing. You must remember that United States used to be the biggest superpower in manufacturing until most of the manufacturing in the Rust Belt in the United States was transferred to China through a process called globalization, which was really a move of US and some European manufacturing to China and some Southeast Asian countries. So that global move meant China therefore became the global superpower in manufacturing. Hence, their GDP is now at 18 trillion and growing, and the US GDP is at 25 trillion, but it's growing at a much slower rate than the Chinese GDP. The American GDP grows because of services. So America is big on financial services, health services, or manufacturing of high-end materials and goods. However, China is taking over in the everyday home consumables and durable goods market, and therefore, hence the need for China to have strong relationships or bilateral relationships with countries that have got minerals and minerals like Zimbabwe. So our relationship with China is very important. They need us, we need them to buy from us because China is the buyer. Okay, almost all those countries that have got raw materials, China is the buyer of those raw materials, and also those countries are also buyers of Chinese produced goods. So you will see now the importance of China in global trade. So you will see that someone like Xi Jinping is not interested in corruption. That is why he has fought corruption within China itself, even sacrificing some of the Chinese GDP growth in the past 3 years because of China's desire to fight corruption. China has fought health hazards, including elongating their lockdowns even after the whole world had opened after COVID, because China was prioritizing its public health system over economics. But now they have opened up and therefore their economy is raging on. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because China does not need relationships with people like ZANU PF and Mnangagwa, who are derailing their global footprint. The United States always accuses the Chinese CCP of communism, dictatorship, but I would say that that is China's way of leadership system. That is, it works for them, it has worked for them. Democracy that is like the American democracy does not work in China. The communism that is in China works for the Chinese, and therefore the PR of China wants to present that Chinese system to the whole world as one that works because it has worked for the Chinese economy. So when we have got countries like Zimbabwe that are very corrupt, who do not care about their people, and they've got military backup from China and intelligence backup from China, that poses as a threat to Chinese quest for global relevance or global dominance, because the United countries like the United States can look at failed economies like Zimbabwe and say, look at what China is doing in Zimbabwe. As I told you before, it's not what CCP or Xi Jinping want. It's the Chinese corrupt business people that find a warm reception from the Zimbabwe's corrupt ZANU-PF regime. So we need to call out both the ZANU-PF corrupt regime and the Chinese corrupt officials who are derailing Xi Jinping's agenda of global peace. Xi Jinping was in San Francisco and Washington last month to mend relationships with the United States of America so that there can be global peace and prosperity for everyone. In the meanwhile, Mnangagwa and his regime are looting Zimbabwean resources together with unscrupulous, corrupt businessmen from China who use that money and bank it in the Chinese ecosystem. Remember, as I told you, that the Chinese yuan, the trade, the trade of the Chinese yuan is under 2% in the world, and China wants to up that, and therefore they need to build a robust banking system. One of the ways of doing it is through their use of the BRICS Bank and the BRICS alliance that is growing around the world, and therefore they need to have transparency and install apparatus that inspire growth, that inspire confidence in the Chinese backed financial system, and therefore things like illicit uh, financial flows, like what your ZANU PF and Zimbabwe military generals are doing using the Chinese financial system, is not what Xi Jinping wants to see. It's not what the CCP or the Chinese military wants to see. So I envision a future where the Zimbabwe military is in trouble with the Chinese military because their abuse of power in Zimbabwe has got a bad PR effect on the CCP and the Chinese military, and it gives the United States a weapon to use against China, and therefore it makes the United States to have enough power to elbow out China in global leadership. So if Xi Jinping wants to have relevance in global leadership, they need to distance themselves from militaries like the Zimbabwean militaries and leaders like Idi Mnangagwa, who are blatantly corrupt and together in partnership with Chinese people that are corrupt. And we do know by now that Xi Jinping is an anti-corruption president. He's very big on anti-corruption because they understand that corruption in China and corruption in foreign lands under the name of China is bad for the Chinese CCP, is bad for China's standing in the world. You will see that in the war in Ukraine, China stood aside. Even right now in the war in the Gaza Strip, China stands on the side because Chinese are very smart and they do not want to involve themselves in things that have got corruption and things that have got no value, because they do not need to steal anything from anyone. I have to repeat that China does not need to steal. China does not need to colonize anyone. China is a supermarket, is a manufacturing hub. All countries that supply China, including very successful countries like Australia, the Australian mining industry, which is the backbone of the Australian economy, relies on its trade relations with China. They sell their raw materials to China, and China pays them. And the Australian economy does well because their government is led by presidents and political leaders with good sense. Not in Zimbabwe. What China does is that it does not involve itself in the everyday politics of the countries that they trade with. That gives these African leaders an opportunity to take advantage of that, and gives also these corrupt Chinese businesses an advantage and begin to trample down the poor Africans who otherwise would have had power had Xi Jinping been he'd been taking a stance of demanding anti-corruption laws in the countries that they deal with. But right now, so I foresee a time when Xi Jinping begins to realize that these corrupt Chinese businesses that work together with these corrupt officials from ZANU-PF and from the Zimbabwean military need to be stopped, because it is bad for China and the Zimbabwean citizens. In order for them to be free, we need to stand with China in fighting this scourge, which is corruption. Our corrupt leaders in Harare need to receive this warning that the Chinese military and the Chinese CCP is not going to stand up and support them in their unscrupulous relationship with the Chinese business people that have got dockets waiting for them in China, jail cells waiting for them in China. So don't think you're gonna steal from Zimbabwe and run away to UK or USA. You already have been banned there. Don't think you're gonna run away to China. Chinese military is going to jail you there. So ZANU PF, we have been put under the corner. Holy is God.